All right. So, I'm going to do something that I don't particularly like, which is talk about my feelings. Blech. But before we get to that, it's been a couple of good days of fitness. I've been doing the CrossFit Community Cup. They're running the workouts at CrossFit Mafia. Basically, it was a follow-up online competition where you basically got sorted into fitness houses based on how well you did in the open, and then you had a workout version that matched your fitness level. But the workouts have been pretty cool. I'm excited to see where it goes in the future, and kind of how it evolves and how it rolls into the season and how they excite the community with it. But anyway, enjoyed that so far. Today was like a workout. It was like 4 mini AMRAPs, which is a little rest in between. And I like workouts like that. Though I liked yesterday's better. It was a 20-minute AMRAP. So, I'm a diehard about that. But all right, getting to it. So, like I said, not my favorite thing in the world to talk about. I like just when life rolls. We don't have to stop and chat about these things. But if I wouldn't have a podcast. So I had mentioned a couple days ago that, Cassandra and I don't know, I just feel like we were, just not vibing. And we had like just a couple days of that, just things weren't clicking, and it wasn't like anything major. Like the sky wasn't falling, anything like that. It's just like, we just couldn't see eye to eye on stuff. And we were just like focused on different things. And I was talking to her and she's doing something else. She's talking to me and I'm doing something else. And I want to be focused on this thing, but that, that's not her priority, or, she wants to be focused on this thing and I don't want to focus on that thing right now. It was just a lot of that. And it had been going on for a couple of days. And I'd mentioned the earlier podcast that as we were kind of like having this friction, in my head, I started to spiral a little bit. And it was one of those like, well, she doesn't care what I'm most concerned about. And, why would she do something that way? And why would we do that? And that doesn't make any sense. And why can't we get along? And what does this mean? And like, do we have the same priorities? And, why aren't we clicking? Is it this a sign of something bigger? And looking at that now, it's kind of funny because it's like, we definitely align on the big stuff, the things that really matter, like no pineapple on pizza and, the way you hang the toilet paper. We're aligned on that kind of like universal stuff that's crucial. And I think one of the things I like most about her, and I think a lot of couples and relationships and teams appreciate this about each other, is that we have so many strengths that are different. We have weaknesses that are different. We have preferences that are different. And that's, I think, one of the things that are like, we're not carbon copies. And that's like one of the things I love most about Cassandra and our relationship. So fundamentally, like we should have things in life where we bump into and we're like, I'm going to do it this way and I'm going to do it that way. Like the memes on the internet about like, there's one person who puts dishes in the dishwasher like a mathematical genius, and then another person who puts dishes in the dishwasher like a raccoon high on meth. We fit those categories. I'm not going to say which is which. But anyway, we fit those categories. And anyway, so I was kind of like having this spiral about why we're butting heads and what the reason is. And I was having all these feelings, and when I think of like the feelings I was having, like the voice that voices these feelings, and, kind of talks like this, like, why don't I always, like that's the voice. I was having one of those and a couple days of that. And for once, kind of at the end of the day, I sort of paused and I was like, you know what? I'm not just going to start airing out what I feel. Because sometimes I think it's good to share stuff, but sometimes I think when you do that, you just start dumping stuff out and you don't mean all of it. And feelings aren't facts. And while at some point I think you got to sit down and talk about it, it's good to understand what the feeling is, where it's coming from, why it's happening before you do that, rather than just being like, well, I need to vent this out right now and air it out. And the other reason I think it was like kind of good to hit a pause button and for me just to think about, all right, I'm just going to process these feelings. Why the hell am I having them? Why am I feeling them? Do I really actually believe these things I'm feeling? And in this scenario, especially in any like serious relationship or serious partnership, and I don't just mean like romantic or life or significant other. I also mean like it could be a working partnership, could be a team partnership for sports. If you have like a serious partnership where you're committed to the long journey, and marriage is a long journey, these kinds of relationships or long journeys, it's okay to like put something on the shelf, especially if you're someone who's like, at some point I can sit down and we can bring this back up and have some space and time to talk about it like civilized people. I would prefer the approach to just bottle it up and stuff it down as far as possible and jam the cork in until someday it just explodes and everything falls to shit. But what I've learned as I've had a little more experience in life, at some point it's just good to talk it out like reasonable human beings. That's why we have these giant mouths and these brains behind them to do stuff like that. Okay, so feeling all this silliness, a little bit of woe is me, a little bit of unrealistic expectation, all the good stuff mixed together. Prime suspects. And so in this one instance, I was kind of smart enough to just be like, you know what? I'm having these feelings and I'm just going to wait to talk about them. I'm going to wait until like we're a little bit more cooled off. We're not tired from the day, stressed out with things going on, where we can actually sit down and have a nice conversation. And we have a lot of time for this, which is really cool. And a couple days go by and things are fine and we're kind of busy, a lot going on. She has a bunch of stuff going on with work. I have stuff going on in work. We're prepping for like a trip, coming off fun weekend, travel, fitness, all kinds, coaching at the gym, events, all kinds of stuff. So kind of just rolling stone gathers no moss, caught up in life. Yesterday, kind of just butting heads again, just friction there. Like you go this way, I'll go that way. And then we just both go the same way and bump into each other, that kind of stuff. And these feelings, start coming up inside. And, I was a little bit of a dick, got agitated. And so we start talking about this. And as we're talking about it, I'm remembering what I felt a couple days ago. Like, hey, James, feelings aren't facts. And so I'm trying to walk through with her about like, what is it that, like, why are we having these like little run-ins? Like, what's the friction all about? And of course, it slowly goes down that slippery slope of like, well, is this indicative of some like bigger issue? Because like I feel like that is like the theme nowadays. Like if there's something a little bit on the surface, it's this iceberg and there's all this shit underneath that's really fucked up. And I think in a lot of cases, that's not the case. And so long story short, what was really nice about this is because I kind of waited, because I kind of processed like, hey, these feelings that I'm having about us not having underlying matching priorities, us not caring enough about the other's priorities, that kind of stuff. Because I waited a little bit, I realized just like how out of line all those thoughts were and just out of touch they were. And I was kind of able to hit on the fact that one of the reasons I was having like some unrealistic expectations at home in my relationship with Cassandra and some of my frustrations at home was because of stuff that totally had to do with one of my jobs. And it was just interesting because I didn't connect the two, because, the frustrations I was having in a job, things like, lack of autonomy or like, just this back and forth of like, do this, no, do this, no, do this, no, do this, no, do this, that I feel like I'm stuck in sometimes at this job is, I was coming home and being like, well, that's still the case here. And I just want to do things my way. And we were butting heads on that. And she didn't even know I was feeling that way. And honestly, I hadn't even spent the time to think about that I was feeling that way. Now, it was just really interesting because at the end of the conversation, we got to a really nice resolution. And I had another feeling, which I try really only hard to have two feelings a day. One of them is caffeinated and the other is hungry. But I had a third feeling, and that was sort of a little bit of, I had a little bit of relaxation, a little bit of contentment. I feel like through the conversation, through letting go of this idea that like everything I'm feeling right now is the case of reality, I felt a whole lot better because I didn't hold on to that. Now, why am I sharing all this? Well, I don't love sharing these kinds of things. Partly is because like I don't feel like it's anybody's business. That's probably the biggest one. Second thing is it's like I don't think it's good to dwell. But the other reason is what I liked about this entire process is like I don't think it's just applicable to a relationship with a significant other, romantic relationship, personal relationship. This process is applicable in, like I said, a business setting, a team setting if you compete on a team, a good friendship, and really any sort of relationship that I think you can engage in regularly. And so the big takeaways were, I think in a moment, if you were having a feeling, and maybe if you're having a really strong feeling, one of the things to do is just like, if the world isn't ending, if the sky isn't falling, there's no imminent physical danger to anybody in the situation, it's just sort of to pause and be like, all right, I'm going to remember what that feeling is. I'm going to think about it for a second. And is the feeling I'm having really a reflection of reality? Is it even a feeling that I want to be having? Because I do think there are cases where you like feel something and afterwards like, oh, I don't like that I felt that way. I did feel that way, but I didn't like that I felt that way. It's not the feeling I wanted to have in that scenario. I think a really good example of this is like, if you're not ever someone who is regularly in a scenario or has ever been in a scenario where you have like some real aggressive confrontation, and maybe you handle it like full-blown panic, or you get really embarrassed and flustered to do something, you probably look back on it and you're like, ooh, you know what? I want to be able to feel a little bit more calm in those situations, handle those situations with a little bit more bearing, a little less crazy spaz demeanor. So that's kind of the first thing, is like, there's no imminent danger. And this is challenging too, because I think sometimes we get stuck in these routines of like, this thing that I'm frustrated about is imminent danger because it's the most important thing in the world. But, take a beat. Is this imminent danger? If like you pause the video game right now, I'm a nerd, right where things are at, and you woke up tomorrow and restarted, it's like, would the sun just come up and the day be there and you have your coffee and like you're kind of back on routine? Yes. If that's the case, it's worthwhile to just pause and say, hey, what are these feelings I'm having? Do I really believe them? And are these the feelings I want to be having? And honestly, it took me a couple days to even think through that, because I was really just detached from the thing that I was frustrated with, even though I was bringing that frustration, back home to my relationship with Cassandra. The second thing is, when you're feeling really strong feelings, and whether it's maybe toward yourself, or towards somebody else, I don't think it makes sense to unload. Don't start with the nth degree. Well, we're not getting along because we don't have the same life priorities. It's like, in most cases, I think like there's definitely a scenario where that could be the case, but I think in most cases where you're all riled up, it's probably not the worst case scenario. Like, it just, because it's like everything was fine for the last 2 million days. And then all of a sudden you're just like, well, we just don't have the same life priorities. We're fucked. When you look at it in retrospect, it's a little silly. So that, I think when you start talking about this stuff, and again, it could be just having this discussion with yourself. Maybe you're really frustrated with yourself because you didn't present something well at work, or you're frustrated with yourself because you wanted to be really prepared for, dropping your kid off at, where do you drop kids off? I don't know. Where do kids get dropped? School, I guess. You want to be really prepared and on time for dropping your kid off at school. And I imagine what it seems like with children, it's just a discombobulated circus. And there's a lot of things you can't control. And maybe you drop your kid off and you're really frustrated with yourself. You're late, spill your coffee on your lap. You go home and you're just having all this like berating self-talk of like how you feel. And maybe it's just like, hey man, you're not a loser. You're not a terrible parent. Like, those are the worst case scenarios. Don't start with those. Start with maybe just like, yeah, well, if I packed a bag at night, that might help a little bit. Or it just might get to, kids seem pretty unpredictable sometimes, and they throw a lot of curveballs that we can't control. So it's not that I'm a horrible parent or a total loser. It's just that raising a life, it's a pretty tall order. And so when you're talking to yourself, about this thing that you're having friction over, frustration, like this really powerful feeling, start with like, what is the simplest thing? What is like the not the lowest common number, but what is the smallest thing that could maybe ladder up and explain that feeling? Don't start with like, what is the worst freaking case scenario for why that feeling exists? And then I think one of the last things to do is, when you feel like, because I've definitely had this happen before, like I've had like these kinds of resolution conversations, and I feel like I've nailed the thing. I'm like, oh, you say one thing and you're like, that's it. And yesterday when we were kind of talking through things, like we had like 3 or 4 of these, like, oh yeah, that's it, I think. And then I would pause and I would run that through my head a couple of times. I'm like, is that really the thing? Like, if that was the thing, what else would happen? What else would I feel like? If that's the thing, why did I have all of these good feelings? Like if that was the thing, I feel like I wouldn't have had those feelings. So I also think like once you feel like you've had the resolution conversation, you land on, what is the thing that might be causing these feelings, or what is the thing that these feelings are derived from? Recite it a couple times. Do a little system check. Does that thing line up with reality? And that's what a lot of this was for me, was like, feelings are not facts, and they're important. They guide a lot of our freaking behavior, but they don't always do so in a way that's in touch with reality. And I'm no therapist or doctor or anything, but that's what my personal take on this is there was something pushing me that was like, I feel this way and I need to act this way. And because I feel this way, other things out externally must be this way. And that was just like an asinine way to operate. But when I sat down and thought about it, I was able to pinpoint of like, hey, what is triggering this feeling? And 2, the feeling that I'm having is not an accurate representation of reality. Cassandra and I have perfectly aligned long-term views. I was really frustrated with something unrelated to our relationship. I was just bringing that home. It's not always easy to unpack that stuff. But it was a cool conversation, and I hope that made some sense to you guys. So having a strong feeling, tell yourself it's not a fact. Take a deep breath. Dig around for what might be contributing that feeling. And is that the feeling you want to be having in that moment? Is that feeling an accurate representation of reality? So that's where we're at. About the most uncomfortable 16 minutes of my life. So, but that's just a feeling. Kidding. All right. More tomorrow. Appreciate you.